is Wednesday, May the 8th, a bright sunny day in Vancouver again. Hi everyone, it's Becky here, and I'm crossing the Fraser River on the bus on the way to Vancouver. Cruising through the Burnaby area, so there are a lot more mini skyscrapers now in the greater Vancouver area. Just beautiful clouds in the sky and lovely soothing spring colors. So today I'm getting off at Commercial Broadway Station, getting downstairs and catch a bus. Everything looks wonderful on a bright sunny day. And here I am waiting for bus number 9. And here it is. It will be a 15-minute ride on the bus to get to the cafe. Yes, I think I did a one-day practicum at the daycare here at Vancouver Career College. And we're getting off at Columbia Street, a lovely inner neighborhood. There's a pretty big park on the other side of the street with a lot of dogs. And I'm walking closer to this Milano Italian-style cafe. So I was here around 10 years ago with some fellow urban sketchers on a cold winter day sketching together. It's been a long time. And so I ordered a ham and cheese croissant and a little cup of macchiato. So today I'm starting a fresh new sketchbook. Yeah, so this is the first page attached to the front cover. And I think I'm going to sketch my food and drink on this right-hand side page because it's just easier to balance and film. Starting with the ellipse shape of the cup, the handle, and the body part of the cup, the brim, and the outline of the foam of milk, and a little bit of dented areas. Adding thickness for the handle and the saucer, and this mini spoon, the brim of the saucer, finishing off the contour outline of the saucer, and remembering the brim accentuate the bottom of the cup. Now there's a little bit of overlapping area of the little plate of the croissant over the saucer a little bit. And this is the contour outline of the croissant. And then the fork on the other side. So the contour outline of the plate is on the bottom of everything. So I just did it lastly, adding a sense of thickness for the dish. And the brim, accentuate the bottom of the dish a little bit, and now starting to add this tissue detail of the croissant, the folds of this pastry, accentuate around the overlapping areas of the folds. So I'm using gentle hand pressure to suggest the loose crust of the croissant and heavier hand pressure to accentuate the contour outlines and the deep folds. Now it's time to paint watercolors before the croissant gets cold. Alright, so I'm going to start painting the yellow parts first. So I just grabbed a little bit of yellow ochre, dilute it a little bit to paint the foamy area of the macchiato with a little bit of coffee showing. 2 shades for the coffee, yellow ochre and also burnt sienna close to the brim area. Just a little bit of overflowing of the coffee, so just painting that to add some more character for the cup. And for the first layer of the croissant is a slightly darker tone of yellow ochre. Yeah, wet into wet, orange mixed with a little bit burnt sienna. Okay, and third layer wet into wet, mostly burnt sienna with a tiny bit of cobalt blue to get a darker sepia to blend onto the crust area of the croissant. So it looks even more three-dimensional. Controlling the amount of water in this brown tone on the top layer right now, so the previous layers are not completely covered up. The yellow and the yellow-orange tones are still kind of shining through the semi-transparent wash of the brown. Okay, so I just quickly painted this lavender color of the dish's brim. Grabbing some leftover bluish gray to paint this slightly shaded area, the inside of the saucer, and the right side of the cup because the window is on the left. And continuing to paint these white and gray areas, the fork and the knife is a more concentrated bluish gray, which is mostly cobalt blue, mixed with royal purple and a tiny bit of green. Adding another layer for the very right side of the cup, so it looks even more three-dimensional, and a little shadow on the left side. And carefully painting the brim area here and there, including the dish, leaving some white spots for the shine of the ceramic highlights. Time to paint the shadows. Again, playing with bluish and purplish grays, mixing cobalt blue and royal purple together with a tiny bit of green mixed in. Another layer close to the bottom edge of the dishes. So there's a little bit of value transition or gradient happening. Painting the shadow of the cup a little stronger so it stands out even better. Yeah, so heavier close to the bottom edge of the dishes. So the shadows are pushing out the objects from the paper. Another layer for the croissant, using a more concentrated brown, burnt sienna, with a tiny bit of cobalt blue mixed in, just partially on the croissant, no overpainting, small renderings. And that's it. Here's a look of my finished sketch of the macchiato and the croissant. So this little cup of macchiato is actually very concentrated coffee with a little bit of milk foam. It's very strong, but it's good. And my ham and cheese croissant is still warm after about 20 minutes sketching it. And I didn't know a cup of macchiato at this cafe is so small with concentrated coffee. So next time I think I'm gonna order something else, not a macchiato. So I actually didn't feel like sketching people at the cafe, and the view outside the cafe windows are actually not super interesting, so I ventured outside to see these heritage houses of the inner neighborhood of the commercial Broadway area. There are a lot of lovely heritage houses in this area, and yet down the street the foliage is just so charming. And here I am right outside the plaza of Vancouver City Hall, at the terrace, on top of the terrace right now, looking at the mountains in the distance, fresh spring foliage surrounding the plaza of Vancouver City Hall. So on the right wing of the plaza, there are a lot of picnic tables and benches. So I just grabbed the table. So this plaza right now is so quiet. It's just me and another person far away. Yeah, so just laying out my sketchbook materials on the picnic table, using my Sailor's Fude fountain pen with a 55-degree bent nib to start the drawing. So I actually started with like a really quick 2-minute pencil draft, the stack of box shapes of the City Hall's prototype without doing way too much details. I just want to make sure that everything fits perfectly on this cover page, which is a little bit more precious than the other pages of the sketchbook. Okay, now starting with the top rectangular prism on top of the stack and the Canadian flag right on top. And then drawing the little maple leaf in the middle of the flag. The contour outline of the rectangular flag is slightly distorted because the flag is dancing in the wind. It's not a perfect rectangle. Now moving on to getting the next big shape done, the next piece of rectangular prism and the next one below it and another one on the right side. Yeah, so this building is in symmetry, but most of the right side is obstructed by the foliage. And that's easier, is that I don't have to draw the entire building. So I just did the contour outline of several trees merging into one, and these branches showing in between the leaves, very loosely in little segments of lines, and the major branches, and finishing up this organic fan shape of the trees, and some smaller trees in the middle towards the left. So for the small stack of rectangular prism shapes of these buildings, as you can see, we can see two sides of each box shape. I also drew two lamps on the bottom of the building, and finishing up the foliage and the other half-hidden box shapes, another tree beyond the wall, and some far distant trees behind the building. And starting to use these squiggly lines to suggest the foliage texture, and then starting to install these windows in skinny vertical panels. Yeah, so overall this building is pretty fun to draw. It's not that difficult. We just have to figure out the little stack of rectangular prisms and then install these windows in these vertical rows. Some squares on the same horizontal level of the windows are pretty much solid black. So I just use my brown ink to fill in those squares with solid brown ink. Just enjoying the drawing process. And now just keep working on this easy and fun pattern of the window panels in vertical stripes. So these ones on the left side of the block shape are kind of foreshortened. First of all, I'm going to start with the face of the clock on the upper left, and then these foreshortened stripes of window panels. And this main rectangular prism shape is actually further divided into some extra corners with more windows on the side looking foreshortened. So those are very narrow little squares. The face of the clock is actually the key area of the building, giving so much spirit and identity to this building. So I just did that. And more vertical stripes of window panels. And then accentuate the right side of each vertical panel stripe, and then dividing each panel into squares. So every 2 squares in this vertical row, we get a solid black square. So that's the pattern. And more windows on the right side of the main part of the building. And this part of the building, the cube shape, it doesn't have any windows. A couple more windows on the upper right, and a few more in between the trees here, getting these window panels done, and then those shaded squares. Yeah, so after all, I found the drawing part of the sketch to be the most important than the watercolors, because I really needed to get the shapes of the stacking rectangular prisms right, and the pattern of windows. That's the most important. And that's very much it for the details of the City Hall building. Now I'm moving on to the foreground foliage, adding a little bit of squiggly lines here and there, and finishing up these branches and twigs, making up this giant fan shape of trees merging into one. I think it's actually 2 trees, 2 twin trees merging together. Lots of twigs that we can see through, the leaves, and the staircase going up to the entrance of the City Hall that I want to show in between the twin trees. And that's pretty much it for the drawing process. Okay, now it's time to quickly paint watercolors. I'm going to use my Mungyo watercolor palette as usual, and 2 Holbein water brushes. Now let's get started with the painting. So I'm going to paint the sky area first as usual by wetting it with clear water. It actually dries instantly because the sun is shining directly onto the paper. Playing with diluted cerulean blue and a little bit cobalt blue. So the very first page of the Etchr sketchbook attached to the front cover is not perfect. It's a little hard to get very smooth blending happening without getting these brush marks. But I'm going to continue to have fun and just ignore this fact. Blending on a little bit of green turquoise because I do want a bit of color transition to show the turbulence of air in the sky. Not just a flat blue like a blue wall behind. It is actually sky with air flowing in it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. The sky, I'm not going to overwork it. And now I'm just wetting the building and the foliage areas with clear water. I'm going to illuminate everything under the sun as usual with diluted yellow ochre. So it's a perfect cloudless sunny day now. I think the clouds are all gone compared to earlier in the day. So everything is perfectly exposed to the sun, and it is noon, midday, The sun is in the very middle of the sky, so no big shadows. So everything looks kind of warm and yellowish to show the warm spring weather. For the trees, I'm also mixing in a tiny bit of lime green into the yellow ochre. So I'm just mixing this small range of yellow greens for the trees. So playing with a ratio of, let's see, lemon yellow, yellow ochre, and lime green, different ratios. You can see around the middle to the bottom part of the tree, I'm using a higher ratio of lime green compared to the higher part of the tree. And using slightly choppy brush marks to suggest the foliage bulging from the canopy. And as you can see in the lower part, I'm actually using viridian green to blend into the mid and lighter greens. So it's noon and the sun is right in the middle of the sky, shining down on everything around 90 degrees downwards. And so the upper part of the tree is illuminated. The lower 50% of the tree is shaded roughly, and just pushing the shade softly into the brighter area. So I get a smooth and subtle blending. So for extremely dark greens, I also mix in a little bit of cobalt blue into viridian green and a little bit of burnt sienna for the darkest areas on the very bottom of the tree's canopy. Okay, now it's time to move on to the next tree. Continue to have fun with a blend of yellow ochre, lemon yellow, and lime green, and a tiny bit of viridian green. Yeah, for these other trees, which are pretty similar in tones compared to the larger twin trees. Yeah, so in general, these trees are half illuminated on the upper half and shaded on the lower half. And I'm going to continue render the definitions for these two trees' canopies by adding some shaded tones in between the little branches. So using a super intense green with cobalt blue and burnt sienna mixed into viridian green using very tiny little brush strokes, switching to my medium tip water brush to get this small renderings done. So I'm making many of these brush marks visible, and so to create an illusion of leaf clusters, not just defined by lines, but also by these choppy brush marks, and then painting the branches using mostly burnt sienna. Ooh, it's getting a little windy, so I'm shading the trunk and some branch areas with a darker sepia, which is burnt sienna with a little cobalt blue mixed in. Leaving some parts of the branches to shine, as sunlight was traveling through the canopy, illuminating some of the branches. And then continue painting these trees in the far distance using leftover yellow greens, and then painting the Canadian flag with clean red. Yeah, so this vibrant red colored Canadian flag is adding so much life to this City Hall building. It's a very dominant object on top of the building. Now it's time to shade mostly this building using a mix of bluish and purplish grays. As you can see in my palette, it's very loose and open-ended. Because it's midday, it's actually pretty challenging to paint things around noon because there's no obvious contrast of light and shaded sides. So this entire building is actually shaded. I think only the rooftops are illuminated. The entire exterior of this building is shaded. So I just used two lively grays. And these window panels are slightly darker grays compared to most of the exterior areas. So bluish grays. And the left side of these rectangular prisms are slightly brighter than the front side. So just trying to create a little bit more higher contrast than it seems of the things in front of me. And then another layer for these distant trees using darker shade of greens. Final polish on the bottom half of these trees, pushing for higher contrast. So these are little red lights on the hours of the clock faces. So just painting these in, and that's it. Here's a look of my finished sketch. And it took me about 40 minutes to draw and paint. And a very relaxing one, a monument in Vancouver. Finally painting it after about 20 years living in the greater Vancouver area. Yeah, so after about 20 years, I finally recorded the Vancouver City Hall in my sketchbook. Yeah, so I'm walking around and probably gonna do another sketch before heading home. It's so pretty here, like a garden. Yeah, so I spent another 40 minutes to an hour sketching the townhouses on the outskirts of the plaza. They're really fun to do, surrounded by spring foliage. And I think I'm gonna come back to the Vancouver City Hall again in autumn to paint the autumn foliage colors. Now it's time to go home. See you next time, everyone. Bye.